My grandfather told me that I was responsible for my father's death and took away the insurance money and kicked me out of his house. I've been staring at this blank screen for a while now, trying to figure out how to start. I guess I'll just dive in. I'm a 23-year-old guy, currently living with 2 roommates in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. Life's been pretty tough, but I'm managing to keep my head above water with my job at Super Save, the local superstore. I've been sharing this place with my roommates for about 9 months now. Before that, well, I don't really like talking about it. Whenever someone asks about my past or my family, I just shrug and say I'm alone in this world. It's easier that way, you know? No need to get into the messy details or deal with the pitying looks people give you when they hear a sad story. Work at Super Save isn't great, to be honest. My manager, Mr. Thompson, doesn't seem to like me much. I guess it's because I keep to myself most of the time. I'm not really one for small talk or office gossip. I just come in, do my job, and leave. That doesn't sit well with Mr. Thompson, who's all about team spirit and employee engagement. Last week, we had this big team meeting about improving customer service. Everyone was throwing out ideas, talking about smile campaigns and customer loyalty programs. When it was my turn, I just shrugged and said, "What we're doing is fine." Mr. Thompson gave me this look, like I'd just insulted his grandmother or something. He went on this long rant about taking initiative and showing enthusiasm, but I just tuned him out. Then there was this incident during the holiday rush. We were all supposed to greet customers with a big smile and ask if they needed help. I tried. I really did. For the first hour, I was all, "Welcome to Super Save," and "Can I help you find anything?" But after a while, it just felt so fake and exhausting. I started just nodding at people as they came in. Mr. Thompson pulled me aside and told me I needed to be more enthusiastic. I just nodded and went back to stocking shelves. What was I supposed to say? That pretending to be happy all the time was draining the life out of me? Even during lunch breaks, I usually sit alone in the break room, eating my sad sandwich and scrolling through my phone. My coworkers have invited me to join them a few times, but I always make up some excuse. "Oh, I've got to make a call." Or, "I need to finish up some work." It's just easier being by myself. I don't have to pretend to be interested in their weekend plans or their kids' soccer games. There was this one time when a new guy, Tim, tried really hard to befriend me. He kept asking me to grab a beer after work or join the store's bowling team. I kept refusing, and eventually he stopped asking. I saw the hurt look on his face the last time I turned him down, and for a moment, I felt bad. But then I reminded myself that it's better this way. No attachments means no one can hurt you, right? Anyway, something really weird happened today. I got home from my shift, exhausted as usual. My feet were killing me from standing all day, and all I wanted was to collapse on my bed and maybe watch some mindless TV. But as soon as I walked in, my roommate Jake said, "Hey man, there's some old dude waiting for you in your room. Says he's your grandfather." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My grandfather? I hadn't seen or spoken to any of my family in years. What the hell was he doing here? With a sense of fear, I walked into my room. And there he was, sitting on my bed like he owned the place. He looked older than I remembered, his hair completely gray now, but he still had that same stern look on his face. Before I could even ask what he was doing there, he started talking. "About time you showed up," he grumbled. "I've been waiting for hours." I just stood there, frozen. He continued, "I need money. My pension's not cutting it, and I've got bills to pay." I felt anger bubbling up inside me. After all these years, this is what he comes to me for? Money? I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied, "I don't have any money to give you. I can barely pay my own bills." That's when things got ugly. He looked at me with this arrogant expression and said, "I'm your grandfather. You should be supporting me in my old age. It's your duty." There was no kindness in his voice, no request. It was a demand, plain and simple. Like I owed him something. Like he hadn't. No. I wasn't going to think about that now. I stood my ground and repeated, "I can't help you. I'm sorry, but you need to leave." He glared at me for what felt like forever, then got up and stormed out. As he left, he turned and said, "You'll regret this, boy. Mark my words." After he was gone, Jake and my other roommate, Sarah, asked what that was all about. I didn't want to get into it, so I just said, "Family stuff. Don't worry about it." Sarah looked concerned. "Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should have helped him. He is your grandfather, after all." I appreciated her concern, but she had no idea what she was talking about. "Trust me," I said. "I made the right decision." Now, hours later, I'm sitting here wondering if I did the right thing. Part of me feels guilty. He is old, and he is my grandfather. But then I remember everything that happened, and the guilt turns to anger all over again. I worked hard to build this life for myself. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm not about to let him waltz in and ruin it. Not again. I know this is a mess of a situation, and maybe I should feel guilty. But I don't. Am I wrong for standing up to him? Should I have helped him, even though he treated me like dirt? I just don't know anymore. There's so much more to this story, things I've never told anyone. Sometimes I think about opening up, about letting people in. But then I remember how much it hurts to lose people, and I close myself off again. For now, I guess I'll just keep going as I have been. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, rinse and repeat. It's not much of a life, but it's safe. And after everything I've been through, safe feels pretty good. Update 1. It's been a week since my last post, and things have gotten even more complicated. My phone has been blowing up with calls and messages from relatives I haven't spoken to in years, aunts, uncles, cousins, people I barely even remember, all suddenly reaching out, and they all have the same message. I need to help my grandfather. Apparently, he's in some kind of financial trouble. I've heard everything from, he's about to lose his house, to, he can't afford his medication. Part of me wonders if any of it is true, or if it's just another one of his schemes. All this pressure has got me thinking about why I don't want to help him in the first place. I've been trying to push these memories away for so long, but I guess it's time I shared the whole story. It's not pretty, but here goes. I grew up in a different state with my mom and dad. We weren't rich, but we were happy. My mom was everything to me. I remember how she used to sing me to sleep every night, even when I insisted I was too old for lullabies. Her voice wasn't great, but to me, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. She'd make these amazing blanket forts with me on rainy days, and we'd spend hours reading stories and pretending we were explorers in a magical land. She'd use different voices for each character, and I'd laugh so hard my stomach hurt. One of my favorite memories is when she took me to the park on my 6th birthday. We had a picnic, and she'd baked this lopsided cake that looked more like a volcano than a cake. But it was perfect, because she'd made it just for me. We spent the whole day there, playing on the swings, feeding the ducks, and just talking. She had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world. But then, just a few months after I turned 6, my mom died. It was sudden, a car accident. One day she was there, laughing and singing and making everything better. The next day she was gone. I didn't really understand what was happening. All I knew was that she wasn't coming back, and my world had fallen apart. My dad tried his best, but he was struggling too. He'd just lost the love of his life, and now he had to figure out how to raise a kid on his own. I remember hearing him cry at night when he thought I was asleep. 6 months after that, my dad decided we needed a fresh start. We packed up our things and moved to the state where I live now, into my grandfather's house. My grandmother was still alive then. Living with my grandparents was different. The house was bigger than our old apartment, but it felt colder somehow. My grandfather was never really there, even when he was physically present. He'd spend most of his time in his armchair, drinking beer and watching the news or sports. He never seemed interested in getting to know me or spending time with us as a family. I remember trying to show him a drawing I'd made in school once. He just grunted and told me not to bother him while the game was on. After a while, I stopped trying. My grandmother, though, she was amazing. She tried her best to fill the void left by my mom. She'd bake cookies with me on weekends, teaching me how to measure ingredients and letting me lick the spoon. We'd sit on the porch swing in the evenings, talking about my day at school. She always listened, really listened, not just nodding along like my dad sometimes did. She taught me how to play chess, and even though I wasn't very good, she always made me feel like a champion. "You're thinking strategically," she'd say, even when I made a dumb move. That's the mark of a true chess master. But life had more cruel twists in store for me. When I was 17, my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. It was aggressive, and within months, she was gone. I spent as much time with her as I could in those last weeks. She was so weak, but she still tried to smile for me. The last thing she said to me was, "Be brave, my little chess master. Life is full of tough moves, but you'll figure it out." My grandfather? He barely reacted. It was like he didn't even care that his wife of over 40 years had died. He didn't cry at the funeral, didn't say a word during the service. He just stood there, stone-faced, while I felt like my heart was being ripped out all over again. The next year, when I had just turned 18, my dad died in a car accident. It was like some sick joke. The same way I'd lost my mom, now I'd lost my dad too. I was devastated, completely lost. And that's when my grandfather showed his true colors. He blamed me for everything. He said it was my fault that his wife and son had died so young. "You're bad luck," he told me one night, after he'd had too much to drink. "Everything you touch turns to ash." I was too shocked and grief-stricken to argue. I just took it, thinking maybe he was right, maybe I was cursed or something. Looking back now, I can see how messed up that was. But at the time, I was just a kid who'd lost everyone he loved. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. A few weeks after my dad's funeral, some life insurance agents came to the house. They told us that my dad had a life insurance policy, and as the beneficiary, I was set to receive $70,000. It was a lot of money, especially for an 18-year-old kid who'd just lost everything. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could use this to go to college, to start a new life. That's when my grandfather stepped in. He told the agents that I was too young and financially inexperienced to handle that kind of money. He suggested that the money be given to him, and he'd pass it on to me when I turned 21. When the agents asked me if I was okay with this, I agreed. I trusted him. He was the only family I had left after all. The paperwork was signed, the money was transferred to my grandfather's account, and I thought that was that. I'd get the money in a few years, and maybe it would help me start a new life. Maybe my grandfather and I could even start to repair our relationship. But a few days later, I came home from my part-time job at a local diner to find the house locked. My belongings were piled up outside with a note. My grandfather had taken all the money and gone to live with his cousin in another state. The note said I needed to find a new place to live because he wouldn't let me stay in his house anymore. I stood there, staring at that note, for what felt like hours. I couldn't believe it. He'd taken everything, the money, the house, my last shred of hope. The note didn't even say goodbye, just, "Find somewhere else to live. Don't try to contact me." Just like that, I was homeless, penniless, and completely alone at 18. That day, I packed up what little I had and left. I've been on my own ever since, struggling to make ends meet, working whatever jobs I could find. I spent a few nights in a shelter before I found a cheap room to rent. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, just to keep a roof over my head and food in my stomach. It hasn't been easy. There were nights when I went to bed hungry, days when I didn't know if I'd be able to pay rent. But I survived. I clawed my way up from nothing, taught myself how to budget, how to live on next to nothing. I'm not doing great, but I'm doing okay. And I did it all on my own. And now, after all these years, my grandfather has the audacity to show up and demand money from me. The same man who stole my inheritance, who kicked me out when I needed help the most, now wants me to support him. I've made up my mind. I'm not just going to ignore him, I'm going to fight back. I'm planning to talk to a lawyer about filing a case against him for stealing that $70,000 from me. It was my dad's last gift to me, meant to help me start my life. And he took it without a second thought. I know this is a lot, and maybe it explains why I reacted the way I did when he showed up. I'm done being the victim. It's time I stood up for myself. Part of me is scared. I've spent so long trying to forget all of this, trying to move on. But I can't keep running from my past. I need to face it head on, even if it's terrifying. I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe I'll win the case, maybe I won't. But at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror and know that I didn't let him walk all over me again. To all those relatives calling me, telling me I need to help him. Where were you when I needed help? Where were you when I was 18 and homeless? Your silence then speaks louder than your words now. I know this update is heavy, and I appreciate everyone who's taken the time to read it. Writing all this out has been, I don't even know, painful, cathartic? Both, I guess. But it feels good to finally tell my story, to finally be heard. Update 2. Hey everyone, I wanted to give you all a quick update on what's been happening. After a lot of thought and encouragement from many of you, I decided to take action. I made a post on Facebook, sharing my story and linking to this Reddit thread. I made sure to include every member of my family in the post. To be honest, I don't have any real expectations from them. They never came to my aid when I needed help the most. but I did this for my own peace of mind. I needed to let it all out, to make my voice heard. In the post, I laid out everything: how my grandfather took my inheritance, how he kicked me out, and how he had the nerve to come back asking for money. I described the years of struggle I went through, working multiple jobs, barely scraping by, all while dealing with the emotional trauma of losing my entire family. I made it clear that I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I talked about my plans to pursue legal action, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I emphasized that this wasn't about revenge, but about justice and finally standing up for myself. I also made sure that my grandfather would see the post. I want him to know that I remember everything he did, and that I'm not the same scared, grieving kid he took advantage of years ago. I want him to understand the consequences of his actions. It feels weird, putting all of this out there for everyone to see. But also, liberating? Like I'm finally taking control of my own story. For so long, I've been defined by what happened to me, by the actions of others. Now, I'm the one taking action. I'm the one speaking up. I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe some family members will reach out. Maybe they'll try to defend my grandfather or make excuses for him. Maybe they'll surprise me and offer support. Or maybe they'll just ignore it all, like they've been doing for years. Whatever happens, I know I've done the right thing by speaking up. I've carried this burden alone for too long. It's time for the truth to come out. I'm prepared for any backlash or drama this might cause. I know there might be people who think I should just let it go, who'll say I'm being vindictive or causing unnecessary family drama. But they weren't there. They didn't live through what I did. I have a right to seek justice and to tell my story. But I'm also hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this will be the first step towards some kind of resolution or closure. Maybe it will force my family to confront the truth about my grandfather and what he did. And even if it doesn't change anything with them, it's changed something in me. I feel stronger, more in control. To those of you who've been following my story and offering support, thank you. Your words of encouragement have meant more than you know. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel alone in this. I'll keep you updated on what happens next, whether I hear from my family or how things go with the legal process. But regardless of what happens, I know I've taken an important step. I've broken my silence, and there's no going back now. Thank you all for listening to my story and for your support. It means more than you know. Here's to hoping for justice and a brighter future.